Margaret Hayes stepped out of the taxi, her silver hair catching the soft glow of the afternoon sun. She adjusted her beige coat and took a deep breath, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness as she looked up at the towering building in front of her. The Ocean View Grand Hotel stood proudly against the skyline, its glass windows reflecting the blue of the ocean nearby. It was a place where luxury met elegance, and Margaret had always dreamed of experiencing it for herself. Wasn't someone who craved attention or indulged in extravagance often. In fact, Margaret lived a quiet life in a small suburban town, spending her days tending to her garden and reading books by the fireplace. But this time, things were different. Her family reunion was happening in the city, and she thought it would be nice to treat herself to one night of comfort and relaxation before joining the chaos of relatives she hadn't seen in years. The idea of staying at such a grand hotel felt like a little adventure, something to break the monotony of her routine. With her small suitcase in hand, Margaret walked through the revolving doors of the hotel. The lobby was breathtaking. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and the air smelled faintly of fresh flowers. A pianist played softly in the corner, adding a touch of sophistication to the atmosphere. Margaret felt a bit out of place among the well-dressed guests sipping coffee and chatting casually, but she reminded herself that everyone deserved a moment of luxury now and then. At the reception desk, a young woman with a polite smile greeted her. "Good afternoon, ma'am," said the receptionist, whose name tag read Lisa. Margaret smiled back warmly and placed her hands on the counter. "Hello, dear. I'd like to check in, please." Lisa glanced down at her computer screen, tapping away quickly. After a few moments, her expression shifted slightly. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we're fully booked right now," she said apologetically. "We have a big conference going on nearby, so all our rooms are occupied." Margaret blinked in surprise. She had expected the hotel to be busy but not completely full. Still, she didn't want to give up just yet. "Oh, I see," she replied gently. "Is there anything you can do? Even the smallest room would work, for me. I really don't need much space." Lisa hesitated, glancing at the screen again. "I understand, ma'am, but unfortunately, we're unable to accommodate any additional guests tonight. Our policy is very strict during peak seasons like this." Margaret nodded slowly, trying to hide her disappointment. She had imagined relaxing in a cozy room, perhaps enjoying a cup of tea while gazing out at the ocean. Instead, she found herself standing awkwardly in the middle of a lavish lobby, being told there was no room for her. "Thank you anyway," Margaret said softly, forcing a smile. She picked up her suitcase and turned away, feeling a pang of embarrassment. As she walked toward the exit, she couldn't help but notice how some of the other guests looked at her curiously, as if wondering why an older woman in modest clothing was leaving without checking in. Outside, the cool breeze hit her face, and Margaret paused for a moment to collect her thoughts. She felt foolish for even attempting to stay at such a fancy place. Maybe she should have stuck to her original plan of booking a simpler hotel instead of reaching for something beyond her usual lifestyle. But deep down, she knew it wasn't about the money or showing off. It was about treating herself to a rare moment of joy. As she waited for another taxi, Margaret pulled out her phone and dialed her granddaughter Emily's number. Emily was always cheerful and easy to talk to, and Margaret needed someone to share her frustration with. When Emily answered, her voice brightened instantly. "Grandma, how's your trip so far?" Margaret sighed. "Well, it could be better. I tried to check into that fancy hotel, the Ocean View Grand, but they turned me away. They said they're all booked up." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Then Emily burst out laughing. "Wait. Grandma, did you say the Ocean View Grand?" "Yes, why?" Margaret asked, confused by her granddaughter's reaction. Emily's tone grew serious. "Grandma, that's Uncle Daniel's hotel." Margaret froze, her grip tightening on the phone. Daniel Hayes, her son, the billionaire entrepreneur who owned several businesses across the country, was indeed the owner of the Ocean View Grand. She had forgotten that detail entirely when she decided to stay there. The realization hit her like a wave, and for a moment she felt both amused and mortified. "What am I going to do now?" Margaret muttered, half to herself and half to Emily. "You should call Uncle Daniel right away," Emily suggested firmly. "He'll fix this, no doubt about it." But Margaret hesitated. She didn't want to bother Daniel over something so trivial. He was always busy running his empire, and she hated the thought of making him deal with her problems. Besides, she had already left the hotel. Surely it wasn't worth stirring up trouble over. Still, Emily insisted. "Come on, Grandma. This is hilarious. Imagine the look on their faces when they find out they turned away the owner's mom." Despite her initial reluctance, Margaret eventually agreed. She hung up with Emily and dialed Daniel's number. Her son answered almost immediately, his voice filled with concern when he heard about what had happened. Margaret explained the situation briefly, emphasizing that she didn't want to cause any drama. But Daniel, ever protective of his mother, assured her that he would take care of everything. By the time Margaret ended the call, she couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. Here she was, the mother of one of the wealthiest men in the country, denied entry to his own hotel. Life certainly had a funny way of surprising you. Unbeknownst to Margaret, her story was far from over. What started as a simple misunderstanding would soon spiral into a lesson in humility, forgiveness, and the importance of treating every person with dignity, regardless of who they might be connected to. For now, though, Margaret simply sat in the taxi, watching the city pass by, wondering how this strange twist of fate would unfold. Daniel Hayes sat in his sleek office on the top floor of a skyscraper in downtown Chicago. The room was modern yet inviting, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of the city skyline. Papers and reports were scattered neatly across his desk, but his mind wasn't focused on work. Instead, he kept replaying the conversation he'd just had with his mother, Margaret. Margaret's voice had been calm, almost too calm, as she recounted her experience at the Ocean View Grand Hotel. She hadn't sounded angry or upset, just disappointed and a little embarrassed. That made it worse for Daniel. If she had yelled or complained, he might have felt less guilty. But her quiet tone carried a weight that hit him hard. How could this happen? His own hotel turning away his mother like she was just another unwanted guest? Daniel leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his dark hair. He had built the Ocean View Grand from the ground up, pouring years of effort into creating a brand known for its luxury and exceptional service. It wasn't just about making money. It was about giving people an unforgettable experience. And yet here they were, his staff failing to recognize one of the most important people in his life. He picked up his phone and dialed the hotel manager, Mr. Peterson. The call connected quickly, and Daniel wasted no time getting to the point. "Mr. Peterson, I need you to explain something to me," he began, his voice firm but controlled. "Why was my mother denied a room last night?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Mr. Peterson stammered, Your mother, sir? I wasn't aware she visited the hotel." "That's part of the problem," Daniel shot back, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "She came in last night, tried to check in, and was told there were no rooms available. Do you know who she is? Or more importantly, do you know who I am?" "Yes, of course, Mr. Hayes," Mr. Peterson replied hastily. "But we've been fully booked because of the conference. Our policy during these times is strict. We can't overbook even for special requests." Daniel clenched his jaw. Policies were one thing, but common sense and humanity were another. "Let me get this straight," he said, his voice dropping lower. "You turned away my mother, a VIP guest, and didn't think twice about it? Did anyone stop to ask her name, to verify if she had any connection to the hotel?" Mr. Peterson hesitated again. "Sir, I'll look into it immediately. I assure you this kind of oversight won't happen again." "See that it doesn't," Daniel replied sharply before ending the call. He stared out the window, his thoughts racing. This wasn't just about Margaret. It was about what the incident represented. Somewhere along the way, his vision for the Ocean View Grand had gotten lost. The focus had shifted from providing genuine hospitality to blindly following rules without considering the human element. Determined to understand exactly what had happened, Daniel decided to visit the hotel himself. He arrived later that evening, dressed casually in jeans and a blazer to avoid drawing attention. As he walked through the lobby, memories flooded back. The countless hours he'd spent overseeing every detail of the design, the pride he'd felt when the hotel first opened its doors. Now all he could think about was how far it had strayed from his original ideals. At the reception desk, Lisa, the same receptionist who had spoken to Margaret, greeted him with a polite smile. "Good evening, sir. How may I assist you?" "I'd like to speak to the manager," Daniel said curtly, watching her reaction closely. Lisa nodded and gestured toward a nearby seating area. "Please have a seat and I'll let him know you're here." While waiting, Daniel observed the staff interacting with guests. Some seemed genuinely attentive, while others appeared distracted or robotic in their responses. It confirmed what he already suspected: the culture of the hotel needed a reset. When Mr. Peterson arrived, his face flushed with nervousness. "Mr. Hayes, thank you for coming," he said, extending a hand. "I wanted to personally apologize for the misunderstanding regarding your mother." Daniel shook his hand briefly but didn't soften his expression. "Take me through what happened," he demanded. Mr. Peterson led him to a private meeting room, where security footage of the previous evening played on a monitor. Daniel watched as Margaret approached the front desk, her posture humble and unassuming. Lisa greeted her politely but seemed disinterested, barely glancing up from her computer screen. When Margaret asked about a room, Lisa gave her standard response about the hotel being fully booked. There was no hesitation, no attempt to double-check availability or offer alternatives. Just a flat refusal. Daniel felt a surge of anger mixed with sadness. Margaret deserved better than this, not because she was his mother, but because she was a human being deserving of respect. He turned to Mr. Peterson. "Do you see the issue here?" he asked, pointing at the screen. "This isn't just about policies. It's about treating people with dignity. My mother walked in looking for a place to stay, and instead of finding warmth and care, she left feeling rejected." Mr. Peterson nodded vigorously. "You're absolutely right, sir. We failed her, and we failed our values as a hotel. I take full responsibility." Daniel studied him for a moment, then sighed. "Responsibility is good, but action is better. I want changes implemented immediately. First, retrain the staff on customer service with an emphasis on empathy. Second, create a system to identify and accommodate VIP guests discreetly. Third, make sure something like this never happens again." "Yes, sir," Mr. Peterson agreed. "It will be done." Satisfied for now, Daniel left the meeting room and headed back to the lobby. He spotted Lisa still stationed at the front desk and motioned for her to join him in a quiet corner. Her eyes widened with fear as she approached, clearly aware of why he was there. "Do you recognize me?" Daniel asked, his tone measured. Lisa shook her head. "No, sir, should I?" "You spoke to my mother yesterday," he explained. "The elderly woman who came in asking for a room. Ring any bells?" Recognition dawned on Lisa's face, followed by panic. "Oh no, that was your mother. I had no idea." "That's the problem," Daniel said firmly. "You didn't bother to find out. You judged her based on appearances and dismissed her without a second thought. Do you realize how that made her feel?" Lisa looked down, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Hayes, I swear. I didn't mean to." "I believe you," Daniel interrupted, softening slightly. "But good intentions aren't enough. You work for a hotel that prides itself on excellence. Excellence means going above and beyond for every single guest, regardless of how they look or what they wear. Can you promise me you'll do better?" "Yes, sir," Lisa whispered, nodding earnestly. "I'll do whatever it takes." Daniel gave her a small smile. "Good, because mistakes are opportunities to learn. Don't waste this one." As he exited the hotel, Daniel felt a mix of emotions: anger, disappointment, but also hope. He knew change wouldn't happen overnight, but he was determined to restore the spirit of hospitality that had once defined the Ocean View Grand. For Margaret's sake and for everyone else who walked through those doors, He would ensure that no one ever felt unwelcome again. The next morning, Margaret Hayes received a call from her son, Daniel. His voice was calm but carried a hint of determination that she recognized immediately. "Mom," he began, "I've handled everything at the hotel. I want you to come back today so we can make this right." Margaret hesitated, gripping the phone tightly. She appreciated Daniel's efforts, but part of her still felt uneasy about returning to the Ocean View Grand. The memory of being turned away lingered in her mind, and she wasn't sure she wanted to face the same staff who had dismissed her so casually. "Daniel, sweetheart, it's fine," she said softly. "You don't need to go through all this trouble for me." "It's not trouble, Mom," Daniel replied firmly. "This is important, not just for you, but for the hotel. They need to understand what happened and how to prevent it in the future. Besides, you deserve to be treated like the special guest you are." Margaret sighed, knowing there was no arguing with her son once he set his mind to something. "All right, Daniel. If it means that much to you, I'll come back. But please don't make a big fuss over me." Daniel chuckled. "No promises, Mom. Just be ready by noon. Someone will pick you up." True to his word, a car arrived at Margaret's doorstep promptly at noon. The driver greeted her warmly and opened the door for her, making her feel slightly less anxious about the visit. As they drove to the hotel, Margaret stared out the window, watching the city pass by. She couldn't help but wonder how this day would unfold. When they reached the Ocean View Grand, Margaret stepped out of the car and was immediately greeted by a line of hotel staff standing near the entrance. At the front stood Lisa, the receptionist from the previous day, looking nervous but sincere. Behind her was Mr. Peterson, the manager, along with several other employees. All of them wore polite smiles, though their expressions hinted at apprehension. "Welcome back, Mrs. Hayes," Mr. Peterson said, stepping forward. "On behalf of everyone here at the Ocean View Grand, I deeply apologize for the way you were treated during your last visit. It was unacceptable, and we are truly sorry." Margaret blinked in surprise, unsure of how to respond. She hadn't expected such a formal apology or any apology at all. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice gentle. "I appreciate that." Mr. Peterson gestured toward the lobby. "Please, allow us to escort you to your suite. We've prepared the penthouse for you, and we hope it will make up for the inconvenience." Before Margaret could protest, Lisa spoke up, her voice trembling. "Mrs. Hayes, I want to personally apologize for turning you away yesterday. I didn't realize who you were, and even if I had, I should have treated you with more kindness and respect. I'm so sorry." Margaret looked at Lisa, seeing the genuine remorse in her eyes. Her heart softened, and she gave the young woman a reassuring smile. "It's all right, dear. Mistakes happen. What matters is learning from them." Lisa nodded gratefully, her shoulders relaxing slightly. With that, the staff led Margaret into the hotel, where she was shown to the elevator and taken directly to the penthouse suite. When the doors opened, Margaret gasped in awe. The room was breathtaking, a spacious living area with plush furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the ocean, and fresh flowers arranged elegantly on every table. A handwritten note from Daniel rested on the coffee table, accompanied by a basket of fruit and chocolates. "Wow," Margaret whispered, taking it all in. She had never imagined staying in such luxury, and despite her initial reluctance, she couldn't deny the beauty of the space around her. A member of the staff approached her cautiously. "Mrs. Hayes, is there anything else we can do for you? Anything at all?" Margaret shook her head with a kind smile. "No, thank you. This is more than enough." As the staff left her to settle in, Margaret wandered to the window and gazed out at the sparkling water below. For a moment, she felt conflicted. On one hand, she was grateful for the effort Daniel and the hotel staff had put into making amends. On the other hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that none of this should have been necessary in the first place. Shouldn't hospitality come naturally, without requiring elaborate gestures to fix mistakes? Later that afternoon, Daniel arrived at the hotel to check on his mother. He found her sitting on the balcony, sipping tea and enjoying the view. "How are you holding up, Mom?" he asked, pulling up a chair beside her. Margaret smiled at him. I'm doing well, sweetheart. Thank you for arranging all of this. It's lovely. Daniel nodded, though his expression remained serious. I'm glad you like it, but I know none of this makes up for what happened. I've already started implementing changes at the hotel to ensure something like this doesn't happen again. Margaret raised an eyebrow. What kind of changes? For starters, better training for the staff on customer service, empathy, and recognizing VIP guests discreetly. Also, new policies to handle situations where guests might be turned away due to overbooking, and bonuses for employees who demonstrate exceptional care and attention. That sounds wonderful, Margaret said, her tone thoughtful. But Daniel, I hope you're not doing this just for me. These changes should benefit everyone who visits the hotel, not just people like me. You're absolutely right, Daniel replied, smiling faintly. That's exactly why I'm doing it. Hospitality isn't about treating certain guests better. It's about treating all guests with dignity and respect. I lost sight of that, and I won't let it happen again. Margaret reached over and patted his hand. You've always been a good man, Daniel. Don't forget that your success comes not just from building hotels, but from caring about the people who walk through their doors. Her words struck a chord with Daniel, reminding him of why he had entered the hospitality industry in the first place. It wasn't about wealth or fame. It was about creating experiences that made people feel valued and cared for. Over the years, he had become so focused on expanding his empire that he had neglected the human side of his business. Now, thanks to his mother's experience, he had a chance to refocus and rebuild, not just the hotel, but its culture. That evening, Daniel hosted a small dinner in the hotel's private dining room for Margaret and a few close family members who were in town for the reunion. The atmosphere was warm and lighthearted, with laughter filling the air as stories were shared and memories revisited. Margaret seemed genuinely happy, her earlier discomfort fading away as she enjoyed the company of her loved ones. At one point, Emily leaned over and whispered to her grandmother, "So, Grandma, do you think you'll ever stay at another fancy hotel after this?" Margaret chuckled. "Maybe someday, but only if I know for sure my son owns it." Everyone laughed, including Daniel, who raised his glass in a toast to second chances and to never forgetting the importance of treating others with kindness. As the night drew to a close, Margaret reflected on the events of the past 2 days. What had started as a simple misunderstanding had turned into a lesson in humility, forgiveness, and the power of compassion. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be perfect. Mistakes would still happen and people would sometimes fall short. But she also knew that growth came from learning and improving. For now, she was content to sit back, sip her tea, and enjoy the beauty of the moment. After all, life's greatest joys often came when you least expected them, even in the form of a luxurious penthouse overlooking the ocean. The following week, news of the incident at the Ocean View Grand Hotel began to spread. It started quietly, with whispers among employees and guests who had witnessed Margaret Hayes' return to the hotel. But soon, word reached the media, thanks to a blog post written by a travel journalist staying at the hotel during the conference. The article, titled "A Billionaire's Mother Turned Away: Lessons in Hospitality," quickly went viral, sparking conversations across social media and beyond. At first, Daniel Hayes was concerned about the attention. He had hoped to handle the situation privately, using it as an opportunity to improve the hotel without drawing unnecessary scrutiny. However, he quickly realized that the story had taken on a life of its own, and there was no stopping it. Instead of fighting the publicity, he decided to embrace it, using the moment to highlight the importance of empathy and customer service in the hospitality industry. Margaret, meanwhile, found herself at the center of the storm. She received calls from friends and family members who had read the article or seen snippets of interviews online. Some praised her for handling the situation with grace, while others joked about how ironic it was that she had been turned away from her own son's hotel. Despite the attention, Margaret remained humble, brushing off compliments and insisting that the real focus should be on the lessons learned. "It's not about me," she told anyone who asked. It's about making sure everyone feels welcome, no matter where they come from or what they look like. Daniel couldn't have agreed more. He called a meeting with his senior management team to discuss next steps. The room was filled with executives from various departments, all eager to hear his thoughts on how to move forward. Daniel stood at the front, his demeanor calm but authoritative. "Let's talk about what happened," he began, addressing the group. "Yes, it was a mistake, a big one. But mistakes are opportunities to grow. I want us to use this as a chance to redefine our values and remind ourselves why we're in this business." He outlined a series of initiatives aimed at improving customer service and fostering a culture of kindness within the hotel. First, he announced the creation of a new training program focused on empathy and communication skills. Every employee, from housekeeping staff to managers, would participate in workshops designed to help them connect with guests on a deeper level. Second, Daniel introduced a policy called the Second Chance Promise. Under this initiative, if a guest ever felt dissatisfied with their experience at any of his hotels, they could request a personal meeting with a manager to discuss their concerns. The goal was to ensure that every issue was addressed promptly and respectfully, leaving guests feeling heard and valued. Finally, Daniel emphasized the importance of recognizing VIP guests, not just celebrities or wealthy individuals, but anyone whose presence might hold significance. He instructed the staff to pay closer attention to details like names and connections, ensuring that special guests were treated with the care and respect they deserved. As the meeting concluded, Daniel looked around the room, meeting each person's gaze. "This isn't just about fixing what went wrong," he said firmly. "It's about setting a standard for excellence. Let's make sure the Ocean View Grand is known not just for its luxury, but for the way it makes people feel." Word of these changes spread quickly, both inside and outside the company. Employees felt inspired by Daniel's leadership and commitment to improvement. Guests, too, noticed a difference in the quality of service. Staff members greeted them with genuine smiles, remembered their preferences, and went out of their way to make their stays memorable. Slowly but surely, the hotel's reputation began to shift, from a place of opulence to a haven of warmth and hospitality. For Margaret, the transformation was evident during her final day at the hotel. As she prepared to leave, Lisa approached her with a small bouquet of flowers. "Mrs. Hayes, I just wanted to thank you again for your kindness," she said, her voice steady but heartfelt. "You've taught me a lot, and I promise I'll never forget it." Margaret accepted the flowers with a warm smile. "Thank you, Lisa. I'm proud of the effort you've shown. Keep doing what you're doing. It makes all the difference." Later that afternoon, Daniel joined Margaret in the lobby to see her off. They stood together near the entrance, watching as cars pulled up and guests arrived. "Well, Mom, I think you've left quite the impression here," Daniel said with a grin. Margaret chuckled. "Never in a million years did I imagine I'd cause such a stir." Daniel wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "That's because you don't realize how much influence you have. You've always taught me to treat people with respect and compassion. Now I'm trying to pass those lessons on to others." Margaret patted his hand affectionately. "And you're doing a wonderful job, sweetheart. Just remember, it's not about grand gestures or fancy programs. It's about the little things, the smiles, the kind words, the willingness to listen. Those are what truly matter." Daniel nodded, taking her words to heart. As Margaret stepped into the waiting car, he waved goodbye, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The incident may have started as an embarrassing oversight, but it had blossomed into something far greater, a reminder of the values that defined not only his family but also the essence of true hospitality. Over the next few months, the Ocean View Grand became a case study in the hospitality industry. Articles were written, seminars were held, and other hotel chains began adopting similar practices inspired by Daniel's reforms. Through it all, Margaret watched with quiet pride, knowing that her simple act of treating everyone with dignity had sparked a ripple effect far beyond what she could have imagined. Life returned to normal for Margaret once she was back home in her cozy suburban neighborhood. She resumed her daily routines, tending to her garden and reading books by the fireplace. Yet whenever she thought about her brief stay at the Ocean View Grand, she couldn't help but smile. What had started as a disappointing rejection had turned into a powerful lesson, one that reminded her of the importance of humility, forgiveness, and the incredible impact one person can have on the world. And so, Margaret continued living her life with the same grace and kindness that had always defined her. Little did she know, however, that her story was far from over. The seeds of change she had unknowingly planted would continue to grow, touching countless lives and inspiring others to follow in her footsteps. After all, sometimes the smallest actions can lead to the biggest transformations, and Margaret Hayes was proof of that. Months passed since Margaret Hayes's unexpected adventure at the Ocean View Grand Hotel. The hotel itself had undergone a remarkable transformation, thanks to Daniel's efforts and the lessons learned from the incident. Staff members were more attentive, guests felt genuinely cared for, and the reputation of the Ocean View Grand soared to new heights. Yet for Margaret, life in her quiet suburban home remained unchanged, or so it seemed. One crisp autumn morning, Margaret received a letter in the mail. It was addressed to her in elegant handwriting, and the envelope bore the logo of a well-known travel magazine. Curious, she opened it carefully and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The letter thanked her for agreeing to participate in an upcoming feature article titled "The Heart of Hospitality: Lessons from an Unlikely Hero." At first, Margaret was confused. She didn't remember agreeing to anything, but then she realized that Daniel must have arranged it. Her initial reaction was one of discomfort. Margaret had always preferred staying out of the spotlight, letting her actions speak for themselves rather than seeking recognition. But as she read further, she saw that the article wasn't meant to glorify her personally. Instead, it aimed to highlight the importance of treating everyone with kindness and respect, a message she wholeheartedly supported. After some thought, she decided to go along with it, hoping her story might inspire others. The interview took place in her living room, where a journalist named Sarah visited with a notebook and a warm smile. Sarah asked thoughtful questions about Margaret's experience at the hotel, her relationship with Daniel, and her views on hospitality. Margaret answered honestly, sharing anecdotes from her life and emphasizing the value of empathy in everyday interactions. By the end of the conversation, Sarah admitted she had been deeply moved by Margaret's humility and wisdom. When the article was published a few weeks later, it became an instant sensation. Readers were captivated by Margaret's grace and the way she handled the situation at the hotel. Social media lit up with comments praising her attitude and urging people to adopt similar values in their own lives. Some even called her the accidental ambassador of kindness, a title that made Margaret laugh when Emily showed it to her. Despite the newfound attention, Margaret stayed grounded. She continued her daily routines, finding joy in simple pleasures, like baking pies for neighbors or volunteering at the local library. However, she couldn't ignore the subtle changes happening around her. Strangers began approaching her at the grocery store or during her walks, thanking her for inspiring them to be kinder and more patient. Friends invited her to speak at community events, eager to hear her thoughts on fostering connection and understanding. At first, Margaret hesitated to accept these invitations. Public speaking wasn't something she enjoyed, and she worried about coming across as preachy or self-important. But Daniel encouraged her, reminding her that her words could make a difference. "Mom, you don't have to give big speeches," he said. "Just share your story the way you always do, with honesty and heart." Taking his advice to heart, Margaret agreed to speak at a few small gatherings. Her talks were informal and heartfelt, focusing less on herself and more on the universal principles of compassion and dignity. She often shared stories from her childhood, recalling how her parents had instilled in her the belief that every person deserved respect, regardless of their background or circumstances. These stories resonated deeply with audiences, leaving many in tears and prompting standing ovations. As word of her appearances spread, larger organizations began reaching out, asking her to address bigger crowds. One invitation came from a national hospitality conference where industry leaders gathered annually to discuss trends and innovations. Initially, Margaret declined, feeling overwhelmed by the idea of speaking to such a prestigious audience. but after much persuasion from Daniel and Emily, she reluctantly agreed, promising herself she would keep it short and sincere. The day of the conference arrived, and Margaret found herself standing backstage, clutching a glass of water and trying to calm her nerves. Daniel stood beside her, offering words of encouragement. "You've got this, Mom. Just be yourself." When Margaret walked onto the stage, the room erupted into applause. Hundreds of attendees rose to their feet, clapping and cheering as if welcoming a long-lost hero. Margaret blushed, waving shyly before stepping up to the microphone. For a moment, she simply looked out at the sea of faces, taking in the magnitude of the moment. "Thank you all for having me here today," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I must admit, I never imagined I'd be standing in front of such a large group of people. If you had told me a year ago that my trip to a fancy hotel would lead to this, I probably wouldn't have believed you." The crowd laughed, easing some of the tension. Margaret smiled, feeling a bit more at ease. "But here we are, and while my story may seem unusual, I think the lessons behind it are quite simple. Treat everyone with kindness. Listen to their needs. Remember that every person has value, whether they're a billionaire or someone just trying to find a place to rest for the night." She paused, glancing down at her notes before continuing. "When I was turned away from that hotel, I felt hurt, not because of the rejection itself, but because it reminded me how easy it is to overlook others. In our busy lives, we sometimes forget to see the humanity in those around us. We judge based on appearances or assumptions, and in doing so, we miss opportunities to connect." Margaret's voice softened as she spoke about the aftermath of the incident. "What happened next surprised me. My son, Daniel, used the situation as a chance to improve not just the hotel, but the way people are treated within it. He reminded me that change starts with recognizing mistakes and committing to do better. That's something we can all apply in our own lives." By the time she finished speaking, the audience was silent, hanging on her every word. When she stepped back from the podium, the room erupted into applause once again. People lined up afterward to thank her, many saying her words had touched their hearts and inspired them to rethink their approach to customer service and to life in general. For Margaret, the experience was humbling yet fulfilling. She hadn't set out to become a public figure, but she recognized the power of storytelling to create positive change. Each speech, each interaction, reinforced her belief that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward, touching countless lives. Back home, Margaret reflected on everything that had transpired. From being denied entry at the Ocean View Grand to addressing a national conference, her journey had taken unexpected turns. Yet through it all, she remained steadfast in her values, proving that authenticity and compassion could leave a lasting impact. Daniel called her later that evening, his voice brimming with pride. "Mom, you were amazing today. Did you see how many people were inspired by what you said?" Margaret chuckled softly. "I hope so, sweetheart. But honestly, I think the real credit goes to everyone who chooses to act with kindness. All I did was remind them of what they already know deep down." "That's exactly why people love you, Mom," Daniel replied. "You make them believe they can be better, and then they actually try." Margaret smiled, feeling a warmth in her chest. Though she still preferred the quiet comfort of her garden over the glare of the spotlight, she knew her story had sparked something meaningful. Change wasn't easy, and it certainly didn't happen overnight. But if enough people committed to treating others with dignity and care, the world would undoubtedly become a brighter place. And so Margaret returned to her peaceful routines, content in the knowledge that her actions, both intentional and accidental, had planted seeds of kindness that would continue to grow long after she was gone. As winter approached, Margaret Hayes settled into a rhythm that felt familiar yet subtly different. Her garden was now covered in frost, and the days grew shorter, but her heart remained warm with the memories of the past year. The whirlwind of attention had slowed down, though its effects lingered in meaningful ways. Letters continued to arrive at her doorstep, notes of gratitude from strangers who said her story had changed their perspective on life. Some shared stories of how they had started volunteering or treating others with more kindness after hearing her speak. Others simply thanked her for being a reminder that even small actions could make a big difference. Margaret kept these letters in a special box by her fireplace, reading them whenever she needed encouragement. Each one reminded her that humanity was capable of growth, that people wanted to be better, even if they didn't always know where to start. It wasn't fame or recognition that brought her joy. It was knowing that her experiences had inspired others to reflect on their own behavior and choices. Meanwhile, Daniel Hayes found himself thinking about his mother more often than usual. Her influence had seeped into every corner of his life, reshaping not only the way he ran his hotels but also how he interacted with people. He began attending meetings with employees across all levels of his company, listening to their concerns and ideas without judgment. His leadership style shifted from commanding to collaborative, earning him respect and loyalty from those who worked under him. The changes weren't limited to his professional life either. At home, Daniel made a conscious effort to spend more time with his family, including Margaret. They would sit together on weekends, sharing meals and stories, laughing over old memories and discussing future plans. Margaret cherished these moments, realizing that the incident at the Ocean View Grand had inadvertently strengthened their bond. One chilly December evening, Daniel surprised Margaret with an invitation. "Mom," he said as they sat in her cozy living room sipping hot cocoa, "I want you to come with me to the grand reopening of the Ocean View Grand next week." Margaret raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Grand reopening? What do you mean?" Daniel smiled, leaning forward slightly. "After everything that happened, I decided to renovate parts of the hotel, not just physically but culturally. We've retrained the staff, implemented new policies, and created spaces designed to foster connection and comfort. It's like starting fresh while staying true to our original vision, and I'd love for you to be there when we officially unveil it." Margaret hesitated, unsure if she wanted to return to the scene of the incident. But something in Daniel's expression, a mix of excitement and vulnerability, convinced her. "All right, sweetheart. If it means that much to you, I'll come." The day of the grand reopening arrived, and Margaret stepped out of the car wearing a simple yet elegant dress. The hotel looked stunning, its exterior adorned with twinkling lights that reflected off the icy pavement. Inside, the lobby buzzed with energy as guests mingled beneath sparkling chandeliers. Employees greeted everyone warmly, their smiles genuine and inviting. When Daniel took the stage to give his opening remarks, he began by acknowledging Margaret. "None of this would have been possible without my mother," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Her experience taught us that luxury isn't about marble floors or expensive furnishings. It's about making people feel valued. Tonight, we celebrate not just a building, but a renewed commitment to serving others with kindness and respect." The crowd erupted into applause, turning to look at Margaret, who stood quietly near the back of the room. She waved modestly, feeling both proud and humbled by her son's words. Later, as she toured the newly renovated spaces, she noticed subtle touches that embodied the values she and Daniel had discussed. Comfortable seating areas for conversations, personalized welcome notes for each guest, and artwork created by my local artists to give the space character and warmth. That evening, as fireworks lit up the sky above the hotel, Margaret stood outside with Daniel, watching the colorful bursts illuminate the night. "You've done an incredible job, sweetheart," she said softly, wrapping her scarf tighter around her neck. Daniel glanced at her, his eyes reflecting the glow of the fireworks. "We couldn't have done it without you, Mom. You're the reason we're here tonight." Margaret shook her head, smiling. "No, Daniel, you did this. All I did was remind you of what truly matters, and you took it from there." They stood in silence for a moment, taking in the beauty of the moment. For Margaret, it was a reminder that life's greatest achievements often stemmed from unexpected challenges. What had started as a painful rejection had blossomed into a movement, a testament to the power of empathy and resilience. In the months that followed, Margaret returned to her quiet routines, finding peace in the simplicity of her daily life. Yet, She carried with her the knowledge that her story had touched countless lives, sparking ripples of change far beyond what she could have imagined. Strangers continued to reach out, sharing how her example had motivated them to act with greater compassion. Friends and neighbors praised her for her humility and grace, calling her a role model for the community. For Daniel, the lessons he had learned from Margaret became guiding principles in both his personal and professional life. He expanded the training programs he had introduced at the Ocean View Grand to other properties in his portfolio, ensuring that every hotel under his name prioritized kindness and connection. Guests began referring to his establishments as places where they felt truly seen and cared for, a reputation Daniel wore as a badge of honor. Though Margaret never sought recognition, she came to understand that her actions had a lasting impact. Whether through a heartfelt speech, a handwritten letter, or simply the way she treated those around her, she had shown the world that kindness was a gift anyone could give, and one that kept on giving. One spring afternoon, as Margaret tended to her garden, she paused to watch a butterfly fluttering among the flowers. It reminded her of the journey she had been on, a transformation born from struggle leading to growth and renewal. Life, she realized, was full of surprises, some challenging and others beautiful. The key was to face them all with an open heart and a willingness to learn. And so Margaret Hayes continued living her life with the same grace and kindness that had always defined her. She remained a beacon of hope and inspiration, not because of any grand accomplishments, but because of the quiet strength she showed in embracing life's twists and turns. In doing so, she proved that even the smallest acts of courage and compassion could leave a legacy far greater than anyone might expect.